呢個白白好攞嚟就好正啦。
So we started off, those of you who were with me at the beginning, we started off thinking about what this area was like during and just after the War of 1812. We looked at some maps that were hard to see because they were so small at that time, but there are larger versions of those maps around as well. Believe it or not, when the fort was opened as an historic site museum, first in 1934, this was the result of a high school history project. They made a model. Basically, downtown York, the Toronto Harbour, the peninsula that later became the island, the position of Fort York on high ground at the harbour entrance. There's the crater from the explosion shown there as it shows on the map. So this is before the storm in 1858 blew out the sandy spit there to create the island, before the beginnings of filling in anything south of Front Street or anything south of Fort York. And that began in the 1850s as well. They were dredging out, using that material to expand the land, building railway tracks to where they were loading ships. One of the issues with the Toronto Harbour, and this is what attracted the British to this site, the protected harbour on Lake Ontario, it was not deep enough for really large ships, whereas the harbour at Kingston was. And you'll see that they had to build wharves out a little ways so that a ship could come and be unloaded there, but that same ship would not be able to get closer to the shoreline because it's so shallow. So dredging it out, bringing in railway tracks, beginning in 1856, 57, 58. That's the beginnings of industrialization here. But for what we're showing here, there's the little town of York, 700 people. It was the political capital of Upper Canada. The Parliament buildings, there were two small one-room, single-story brick structures. Actually, those were the first brick buildings built in what later became Toronto. They're not there now, though. There was a covered wooden hallway between them. That was the Parliament of Upper Canada, at Parliament and Front Street. Two streets that are named for things that are no longer there. There's no longer a Parliament on Parliament Street, and Front is no longer on the waterfront. The occupying U.S. troops burned that. It was later rebuilt. It burned again in an accidental fire, in 1824. And then there was another Parliament of Upper Canada built further west later on. And of course now we have the Ontario Legislature, that dates from the 1880s. So King Street was the main street of the town, becoming Kingston Road, the road to Kingston. Yonge Street was the road north out of town. What is now Queen Street was then known as Lot Street because there were lots of land above there. That was the northern limit. Before incorporation as a city in 1834, the western limit would be more or less where Spadina is now. In 1834, York was incorporated as a city with a municipal government. At that point, it had about 9,000 people. It had grown, but also included a bit of a larger space. And the western boundary then would correspond to where Bathurst Street is now. So Toronto, as you may know, comes from the Mohawk language. It means where there are trees standing in the water, which maybe doesn't bring downtown Toronto to mind. But if you look at old pictures, there were certainly trees and water more than buildings, certainly in those years. I didn't mention about traditional peoples for this area. The Anishinaabe peoples are certainly one. That includes the Mississauga, Ojibwe, and Chippewa groupings. But historically, also the Wendat people and the Haudenosaunee or Six Nations, and the Mohawk are one of the Six Nations. There were certainly Wendat towns. Not exactly here, but a little bit north of here in the 17th century. And then later also there were Seneca towns. The Seneca are also part of the Six Nations. Seneca towns along the Rouge River, that's further that way, and the Humber River, that's further that way. But by about 1700, the Seneca had moved back to their more traditional areas in upstate New York on the other side of Ontario. And that's when Anishinaabe peoples were beginning to come into You folks
So
see?
it's in, am I hearing you correctly? So here where York was, none of the nations people settled here. There were no settlements ever here? They didn't find this a good place to settle, or?
Archaeologically, there's no evidence for indigenous settlements in the area that's shown here. There is archaeological evidence for indigenous activity, actually in the east corner of where we are now, and also where the couple of branches of the Garrison Creek meet there, what seem to have been fishing encampments. The Anishinaabe peoples were more hunter-gatherers than the Haudenosaunee, who built towns and cultivated agricultural fields and things. So there's evidence for Anishinaabe peoples fishing in this area, evidence for them using the island, and there's a particular, if you look into it, you can find out about some more recent initiatives to sort of bring back indigenous spaces on the island, which was traditionally a sacred place, a place for ceremony for the Mississauga and other Anishinaabe peoples. There's evidence up the Don River in parts of now North York for the people using the indigenous peoples using the clay in the Don Valley. The bricks here, by the way, are made from Don Valley clay. But yeah, actually near where I grew up in Don Mills, people were finding pottery shards and things in the backyards that went out into a park area there. So it seems that indigenous peoples created sort of ceramic workshops there. This again would be a seasonal activity, and they would be making vessels and containers and all kinds of things out of the clay.
So it's interesting that the newcomers found this to be a desirable place to settle and wasn't settled before. For military strategic and
Right.
water.
Right.
And, yeah.
Yeah, for indigenous peoples, the Humber River would have been more important, and that was true for the French fur traders as well. While this area had been part of New France, there were not a lot of French settlers here. The first real wave of non-indigenous peoples into this area were the refugees from the American Revolution. There were, however, 3 different French fur trading posts close to the Humber, or close or by the Humber River. The first one was up near where Babby Point is, on the high ground overlooking the Humber. Unlike Europeans, the indigenous people seem to have realized you should not build on the floodplain of the river, you should build on the high ground.
Yeah, so that's the, yeah. It'd be interesting to know what was going through their minds as they saw this settlement being.
Well, for the British, okay, so when John Grave Simcoe came here as the first British Lieutenant Governor of the new British colony of Upper Canada in 1793, he liked this because it was a protected harbor on the Great Lakes. He also liked it because it was close to, there was a port, you could actually go up the Humber, say in a canoe a little ways, but then you'd portage, and there was a well-established, the carrying place, there was a well-established portage where you could then go from there up to Lake Simcoe area and then on into the upper Great Lakes. So he would have been aware of that, but he liked this area better because it was a protected harbor. So he wanted to bring bigger ships into this. And that's why the lighthouse is one of the oldest remaining structures from that time still standing, because that would allow ships to find the harbor. And that's why they built Yonge Street. They were conceived of that as a military supply route. And so in a way for the British, Yonge Street would replace the portage route associated with the Humber River. But that would achieve a similar effect. In other words, to bring goods and supplies up towards Lake Simcoe and then on into the upper Great Lakes. If that makes sense. But yeah, there were no Seneca towns where downtown Toronto is now.
So
They do sometimes they find evidence for indigenous presences and even burial grounds. but in like High Park, or I think recently there were some things found near Danforth somewhere.
You need to drink it.
People may have heard of this. I can't remember the name.
Just to be on Mr. Litters, but Simcoe's plan was to not have the capital here.
That's correct.
In London, so this was going to be a military industrial.
That's correct. The original capital of Upper Canada was Newark, now Niagara-on-the-Lake. After Jay's Treaty, the British had to do something they were supposed to have done in 1783, but didn't. They had to give Fort Niagara to the United States, so then the capital of Upper Canada would be within range of U.S. canons from Fort Niagara. But yeah, Simcoe's plan was to have London, the capital, London on the Thames River, which he named, and he thought that would be a good spot because it was kind of central to southwestern Ontario, and there could be, if that was the capital and you had a significant military presence there, you could have roads to take you to border points, and so if something happened, wherever it happened, they would be able to send troops to those places. Arguably, that was an impractical notion given the settlement patterns of the time.
And Simcoe was overruled by the Governor General,
Yeah.
Carleton.
But, yeah, and also Carleton favored Kingston over York as well. At the beginning of the War of 1812, they were going to move the provincial marine to the town of York, but after the battle, then they thought, well, maybe we'll just stay in Kingston since this is a little bit too vulnerable. Anyway, you folks have still here listening to all this.
So it's interesting, the Indigenous wouldn't settle in a floodplain, but that area of Toronto has quite a system to control flood.
Yeah.
Yeah, even today,
Yeah.
because it does flood basements and everything.
Well, you know, when the first version of Montreal got flooded out, and so they had, and this is in the 1630s or something with the French there. Hurricane Hazel hit the Humber River area hard, and it was after that they said, okay, you can't build houses down there anymore, because even the spring runoff, you know, the Humber gets bigger. A lot has been done to reinforce the island as well. I mean, traditionally this was a shifting geographical formation. And as some of you folks probably know, not too long ago, huge chunks of the island were flooded, and people were not supposed to go there.
Yeah. So when do they get rid of this?
Well, this is the Don River.
Yeah, but this is just river. It's not land.
No, this is the Don River.
Oh, okay.
And this is a marshy mouth of the Don.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, a lot of that was changed. The Don River is not in its original course anymore.
Oh, I see.
Partly because it was redirected here, but also when they built the Don Valley Parkway, it would have been too expensive to build bridges over every little wandering piece of the Don. So they actually straightened the river. So
I see. And then they get rid of this. That's why here now is Center Island, no longer
just a storm blew that open in 1858.
Oh,
That's
okay.
Yeah. No, they didn't put it back.
Oh, okay.
Later
I see.
they dredged it out, and there's a lot of lake fill in that area too, right? That's like where what is it, Tommy Thompson Park and these
I see.
places are there.
I see. Thank you.